Okay, let's see. We'll record. I wanted to jump in early so I can try and set up a second one if I'm able to. Okay, I need to preface this by saying that this is a feature request that we've seen that's kind of like near and dear to my heart, uh, but has not it's not like a top priority on our roadmap. So I've sort of been working on it in my spare time, and as such, it's still like really rough. It's to a proof of concept stage where we can start to think about like what do we actually want to do with this technology and how do we want to present it to the user. And then there's still quite a bit of work to get it to production ready. So there are going to be a couple customers out there who are really excited about this, and I just want to like temper the excitement for them by saying like, yes, we're going to do something that will support this. It's going in this direction, but you're not going to have it next week. So with that, okay, just to kind of give the background here, I have a I have a dynamic connection set up. So I've got this local connection. PD local is the name of my connection. And in that connection, I've like added this additional table, but I've got it set up with connection environments. So this is like a different connection I have that doesn't have this table that I've added to it. And then here in user attributes, this is the attribute that actually switches that connection. And you can see I've added this new toggle here to the attribute setup page called user settable, overrideable. We'll figure out the names. And when I do that, then I get this drop down that allows me to select what is the source user attribute for the attribute overrides that a given user is allowed to apply within a certain context. So in this case, I've got, I'm talking about my dynamic connection. This is like the base attribute, and then I'll be able to, the end user will be able to override that attribute based on the values that they are allowed for this allowed dynamic connection overrides attribute that I've created. If we jump into my user currently, let's see. Oh, look, I am allowing overrides. Just to kind of like, well, we'll show that at the end. So then if I show you, I've got this, this query tab open, and on this query tab, I'm currently using the default connection, which does have this table users copy in it. I've got a query up, but I've got this new widget over here in my bar. And basically this widget's going to be populated with all of the attributes that that my user has values that they can apply as overrides. And so if I switch this attribute to the Docker value, then, that actually doesn't trigger a full page refresh. Like I said, this is super, super rough at this point, but you can see that table doesn't exist. So I just switched my dynamic connection by overriding my user attribute in the context of this workbook. It's totally ephemeral. It just lives in the URL bar, and you can see that like that makes it so that the views that I'm also using schema switching in this case, so that user's copy is no longer in this thing. I can turn it off and go back to the default, and you'll see that now user's copy is indeed in the thing. Again, it doesn't trigger the refresh, the reload of the query, but now that query will run. Just to kind of show a little bit more on this, if I were to go in and make it so that my user is not allowed, doesn't have any allowed values for this source attribute, and I come back in and reload over here, you'll see that I can no longer change the attribute for that particular dynamic connection or override the value for the dynamic connection attribute. So this is all configurable on a per user basis. It supports the defaults and all that kind of stuff. Time zones, always overrideable. So that's like a nice little enhancement. This is just like one use case for this. So the original request was to make it so that when we have dynamic connections, some users are allowed to switch them. But what I thought would be cooler was to build something that's totally general. So you can imagine other use cases for this would be like, I'm a developer and I'm developing access grants, and I want to see what it would be like to switch my user attribute values and see if the access grants are doing what I expect them to. I mean, basically anywhere that you can see user attributes, it's like a mechanism to be able to test out and switch context. So I think there's tons of application for this. I'm really excited to push it forward, and I'm excited to share it so that we can start to get feedback and think about, what this really should look like in the future.
Conrad, this is Becca. I had a quick question. I was curious, do you see this mostly as like useful for like doing QA as folks are building, or I'm just curious like at the like what you're building toward?
I mean, I think that's a prime use case, but I actually think that it's got tons of applicability. So like we have a customer, for example, who has a connection in the US and a connection in the EU, and some of their customers are allowed to use both of those connections, and they would like to build content on top of those connections, but then be able to like switch which region they're looking at depending on their, without having to go in. And I mean, not all users are able to switch their user attributes. And so that particular customer, the way that we've solved that is actually to have two separate connections, not be using connection environments and dynamic connections, but instead actually clone the model to their, basically have a Git follower set up where they're doing, one of the models is in follower mode, and then they have to copy their content to both of these models and stuff. Whereas doing it this way would allow for basically having a nice clean way to just maintain the content and the model in one place, and then users who are allowed to see it for different source models can do that without having to, like, right now you could go into a branch and turn on, branch connection switching, but that actually doesn't have the same security profile that this has, where you can specify which users are allowed to switch to which connection environments and stuff like that. So I think that I think it's got potential to be a huge unlock, and yeah, definitely for user acceptance testing and debugging and things like that, totally useful for that. But I think there's actually production use cases as well that we'll start to discover what they look like.
Awesome. Thank you so much.